Hello and welcome to the Espresso Insiders podcast. I'm Luke, and today I'm joined by the CEO of one of the largest and most recognisable pioneering coffee companies in the UK, John Steele. John, thanks for joining.
Hey, Luke, thanks for having me here, and thanks for that introduction. It was far too much.
Because you really are one of the most pioneering coffee companies in the UK and even in the world, especially from a fair trade point of view and what have you. And like I say, pleasure having you on. So I think what would be great, John, is if we run through a few kind of topics around kind of your background in the coffee industry, how you started at Café Direct and in the food and beverage industry first, and then maybe jump into a little bit more about what Café Direct do specifically. I know obviously a load of the listeners will know your products and see you in the shop store shelves and what have you, but a bit more of the background of the company and how we get into that later on. So maybe first of all, starting about yourself and how you got in the industry to start off with, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, it's a long time ago, Luke. But I started work in what's now the largest food company in the world, which is Nestle. And when I joined, Nestle had just completed a hostile takeover bid of Roundtree, which was one of the great institutions of the UK and a great social enterprise and a pioneer in food and drink. And I joined as part of Nestle then and worked in confectionery in York. Um, and so I suppose I started as a classic fast-moving consumer goods marketeer is crudely what you'd say. But certainly joining a business that had just been acquired by another business, you got a real feeling for the values of both of those businesses and some of the heritage of Roundtree. And then I've spent well, more or less all my career working in kind of either commercial sales and marketing roles or general management roles. I I guess I've worked for the biggest food company in the world, and I've probably worked for some of the smallest ones. I ran a company called Cornish Sea Salt when I
Yeah.
think in its first month it was turning over £3,000 and making significant losses. And then with the founders, we managed to make it grow exponentially and make money. Um, and I guess throughout all of this time, the thing that matters really is people. And I guess ultimately, having a great kind of product or brand as well is important, really. But so yeah, I've worked in very big companies, very small companies, in confectionery, cereal, beer, biscuits, sea salt, pizza, and then for the last 12 years, in the Café Direct business. Yeah.
Amazing. And I mean, it's such a broad kind of range of experience there. I mean, do you have any, I wouldn't say which do you prefer, bigger or smaller companies or any particular industry, but specifically thinking about kind of coffee more recently,
Mhm.
what are some of the kind of key challenges or the differences between working in coffee versus any other sort of food and beverage industry
Um,
sector, maybe?
yeah, I think if you have those as two questions, I mean, the first question in terms of what are your favorite places of working and so on and so forth. I think it's really important that we all look at work and we're very positive about it. And I've worked in some places where culturally it'd be very challenging, and I've worked in other places where financially it's very challenging.
Yeah.
But I think if you turn up as a kind of best version of yourself, what will happen is you'll do your best, but you'll also learn. And I think it's quite good to work for a large structured organization and then to work by yourself as well, because it's all making you learn about yourself ultimately. So I think that's the first thing. So I haven't got some favorites. I've certainly got ones where the experiences were very, very different. So when I worked at Weetabix, in those days, it was a family-owned business owned by a guy called Richard George. And so you spent a lot of time with the founder and the owner. And if you agreed with him, the world, things got done.
Mm.
If you didn't, you've got to remember that it's his business, really. Whilst some of the other bigger businesses, there's a lot more process. So you don't have to work with a founder to make him believe in your dreams to make them a reality. You have to go through a lot of process and stuff like that. If you come to the Cafe Direct piece, um, I think the remarkable thing about coffee versus many other food and drink sectors is, you are very much selling one component. You are, so you've got a real clear relationship with the producers, and we'll talk about that with Café Direct in particular. But if you're making a pizza, you've got the different components of bread, you've got different cheeses, you've got different um, bits of meat or chicken or vegetables, whatever you put on them, and you've got a lot of different components that create an outcome. Whilst with coffee, you really are about working directly with farmers to get the best coffee green beans you can, and then working very carefully to roast and get the best flavor out of those beans. And of course, you can also blend them. You don't have to just have single origins. You can make some really incredible blends as well. So I think that's one difference is you are dealing with a single component. The other thing, of course, is it's the world's second most traded commodity after oil. So you've got some really interesting dynamics in the way that pricing works as well.
Yeah. And not to get too technical too early, but I did see an article by the FT, I think it was the other day, about the futures price kind of skyrocketing
Yeah,
coffee kind of, in the past year to date, or year on year rather.
yeah,
And, you are obviously dealing with one agricultural product, which is clearly impacted massively by one, the demand for Arabica, but two, obviously, climate, weather conditions, etc., which,
yeah.
from a price volatility point of view makes a big difference. And then you've got to kind of, like I say, background in financial services, hedge against it and what have you. And getting a bit technical there, but it's, how do you deal with that as a company, those kind of volatile conditions, especially with the price of, like you say, if you're making a pizza and the price of cheese goes through the roof, or maybe everything else might not be impacted, but
Yeah.
if your only kind of product that you're yeah, like kind of producing, curating and selling is so
Yeah.
volatile in price, how do you deal with that sort of uncertainty, really?
If you got the answer, Luke, I'll carry on and listen to you for a while. Yeah. Um, I think I think that's one of the I guess it's one of the challenges. I mean, I remember being interviewed by I think it was the Times. I think it was the Times rather than the FT a few years ago when the price of coffee on the New York Stock Exchange was less than $1 a pound, and now it's over $3 a pound. And when it was at that level, I was really angry because smallholder farmers, which are the families that work tirelessly 20 hours a day to get the coffee, were getting paid nothing really. And although there are issues in the supply chain and the system, at least at over $3, there's more money to play with. And clearly for a business working with customers and consumers in a market like the UK, that volatility, and also if you look at it, that consistent increase over the last couple of years is something really to manage quite carefully. And for us as a business, it's quite a challenge because we want producers, we want farmers to be paid more,
Mm.
but yet we need to make a business out of buying and selling and marketing coffee, whilst paying our suppliers, our producers, as much as we can. And so I think it makes it complicated. And to your point about pizzas, I mean, even something like orange juice, you've got a lot of water in a liter of orange juice. In a bag of coffee, you got coffee. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
there's not much else in there.
no. Um, the other thing I was going to touch on, which I think is probably relevant, is why I joined Cafe Direct in the first place, because I've been there now 12 and a half years or so, and I remember meeting the team there, and they were looking for a new CEO, and they'd had some applicants from certain companies saying, you can't have a business model where you're trying to make money for your suppliers, whether you're trying to improve the lives of farmers, which is basically what we're trying to do. And they said, no, that's too ambitious, too unrealistic. You need a business that makes money for you. And I was very taken by the fact that the the people at Café Direct at the time, which was 2012, wanted to do business differently and wanted to improve people's lives. They wanted to try and get us all to think about social kind of justice, and they wanted to help combat climate change. And I was quite cross that some people were saying, "Hey, that's not realistic. You need to stay business as usual." And I think the last thing we need is business as usual because the world is changing quite rapidly. Although poverty has declined in absolute terms over the last 12 years, inequality has expanded exponentially. Um, Climate change, if you want to sit there and not believe something's happening, then, you really need to think a bit more carefully and look at what's going on. I mean, as you and I will know from this week, climate change is tearing a hole through Western society in the States this week. And, on farms in mountains in Peru or in Uganda or Ethiopia, it's having a significant effect day in, day out. And so I think I joined Café Direct really to make a difference and to try and do business differently. And it makes it very challenging because it's not just about making money, it's about um, making a difference to coffee farmers and also trying to set an example that makes people think about what matters. And so that makes it quite tough, but it makes it very stimulating too. So
Absolutely, yeah, and a few topics to touch on there. I mean, I think when I was doing a bit of reading up on the company, kind of before the episode, I hadn't really realised that it was obviously started by Oxfam to kind of combat the collapse of the coffee. Ironically, we're talking about coffee price. To combat the collapse of coffee price, which is the inverse issue to what we're facing now, in a way that you're then it's a race to the bottom in the 90s, and obviously trying to offer a fair price and be the first sort of company to be certified via fair trade in the coffee space. That's quite a pioneering thing to have happened to the company back then. But I think to your point, we're now seeing on the news, you've got wildfires in LA, et cetera, et cetera. That's visual and people can see that and what have you, and it's
mm,
tearing through homes and what have you. But you're not seeing the degradation of soil quality in Peru, for example, until it hits your pocket and you're having to, pay a little bit more for your bag of coffee beans. But I think to your point, it's something that is impacting, the whole supply chain, climate change, etc., and talk about price volatility as well. But something that I think, particularly in the coffee industry, well, I've noticed a lot is from a marketing point of view, you see a lot of smaller companies kind of trying to promote themselves as, traceable, sustainability, fair trade,
mhm,
which is
mhm,
fantastic in terms of it's a key issue that consumers care about. But I wonder how much of it is as genuine and has as much sort of heritage as what you've done at Cafe Direct. So how do you maybe try and distinguish between, you've got an upstart startup coffee company that's going, we're as sustainable and traceable, and we go to single origin and micro lots and all the rest of it,
mhm.
you know, believe us, versus
Yeah,
versus, you at Cafe Direct are actually doing it and have done it for a number of years. And, how do you try and differentiate yourselves and prove to the consumer that, you are who you say you are,
yeah.
especially in a more competitive landscape at the moment with smaller coffee companies popping up all the time.
Yeah, no, it's a good discussion point. I think because when Café Direct was started in 1991, it was a direct intervention, as you said, because the international coffee price agreement had collapsed. Um, and it was very much Oxfam and three other charities and then three coffee producing cooperatives who came together and said, let's do direct trade. So it was the first example of direct trade, really, which is the point you're making now about quite a few small specialty coffee companies that talk about direct trade.
Mm.
I think then 3 years later, when fair trade came along, we chose to adopt that at 100%. So we're the only one of the founding companies in any food and drink class that's still 100% committed. Now that is, I don't, fair trade is a good component. It's not a silver bullet, but certainly it means somebody's marking your homework. It means you've got, third party verification through certification. Um, if you talk to a coffee farmer, it matters as well because they get a better price and they get a premium. Um, so, I think it was pioneering. I think um, some of the answer to your kind of question about um, the distinction and the differentiation is really that in a way it's difficult at a consumer basis, and I'll come on to that. But in a way, what you need to look at is who owns the company and what they're set up to do. And Café Direct is owned by a multitude of stakeholders who are there to improve the lives of coffee farmers. Most of the companies that you're talking about will be there to make profit for the people who set it up, and then probably to sell it to make more money for themselves. So, in the detail of it all, I think you need to look at ownership and governance. And if you've got somebody who is set up to make a difference, and that's stated in their articles of association, it's all technical stuff, this, but if that's the case, then that's the real deal, rather than somebody saying, my coffee's wonderful, give me some money and it's fine. And then, that really it's there for, I suppose, uh, current kind of business purposes in terms of paying shareholders loads. The difficulty, of course, is in the world where consumers are consuming. If you're buying a bag of coffee in a supermarket, or you're buying it online, or you're going into a coffee shop or whatever, in that kind of moment of truth, it's very hard to get across all the detail that goes behind doing coffee properly and doing coffee well. And I think that's something that we have to keep working on. I think we've done some things that are good about that. Um, but I do think, a lot of people will buy coffee because it's on promotion. A lot of people will buy coffee because they have got into a habit of buying a certain brand that's widely available. But I think, trying to get people to see that coffee done right is really different, and coffee done right will secure the future of coffee, because it's not just about the inflation we'll see in food and drink as climate change takes hold. It's also whether or not you'll be able to get things in the end. I mean, so yeah.
Really good point, because it's something I wanted to touch on as well in terms of how you partner with smallholder farmers. And you've obviously got your London Fields kind of specialty coffee, sort of more micro lot, you know faction, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose part of the sustainability is a word that gets chucked around so often these days in a lot of different industries. And to me, background in sort of economics, it's never been about kind of just being environmentally friendly. I think sustainability is, can you keep doing what you're doing for generations to come? And are you basically, are you producing what you're producing for the short term, and it's having diminishing returns in terms of there's a limited lifespan of we're talking about soil degradation is a good example. If you're not able to pay these smallhold farmers to have a sustainable living, there comes a point where they simply just have to go out of business and can't keep producing. And I think, to your point, it's, yeah, you don't see that over the short term. You see that over a 20 or 30-year period. So the fact that sort of Cafe Direct, what was really interesting there, started as almost a bit of a kind of charity, you know, movement rather than
Yeah.
business.
That's
It's
right. It wasn't set up to make money. It was set up to make a difference. Yeah.
exactly, and that genuinely is the case. And I think, yeah, I mean, sustainability is, I think, a lot more about, in my opinion anyway, is a lot more about, um, can you keep doing this for 20 or 30 years? Because a lot of these small businesses where they're set up purely for with the profit incentive, there's a reason why they're kind of here today, gone tomorrow in relative terms, because they kind of have to be in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, you make very wise points. I think a lot of traditional business is quite extractive, and um, there's a lady called Kate Raworth who has the principle of donut economics, where really it's about you know, being more regenerative and making sure you're balancing social, environmental, and financial capital, and working within the constraints of them, rather than what you're seeing a lot of traditional business doing is, as you say, really degrading soil and degrading society to make money for the few, which the difficulty with that, of course, is for the few, they're quite happy with that power and that extraction. But for the long term, benefit of society and of mankind, that kind of thing, it'll end in tears, won't it? So no, it's very wise. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And I mean, how do you, when you're touching more on how you kind of pick your smallholder farmer producers, especially more when you're going for sort of micro lots in the specialty side of things and kind of those, what people call single origin, which again is a bit of a kind of definition in itself. What actually does that mean? And again, gets banded around a lot. But how do you look to find new producers and what do you look for within them, when you're looking to partner with new farmers in different countries, obviously, as well?
Yeah, it's a subject within itself, isn't it, really? I mean, we have stuck with the same partners for many, many years. So, a lot of companies will buy coffee due to its availability, and they'll go out and get some coffee from wherever just to, satisfy their needs, I guess. I mean, we have long-standing relationships with producers in Peru, Uganda, Mexico, Tanzania, Colombia, where the idea is we're not going into the market saying, "Can you get me some Peruvian coffee?" We're going to our long-standing partners and going, "Here we are, and we're buying some more coffee this year as you'd expect." And so they have a long-standing partnership that they know will be there, and we know they'll be there. We try to have relationships where we're not the only customer. We don't want people to be dependent. But we have a very direct relationship. In the company itself, we have a board of directors, of which two are producers, two are farmers.
Okay.
So, see if you can find another coffee company that does that. That'd be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so on the board of directors, I had a board meeting yesterday. We have a lady called Sylvia Herrera from Mexico, whose father was a coffee farmer who now runs a cooperative, and she works for him, and she represents, producers on our board of directors. And then we have a guy called Michelle from Peru, from a cooperative called Chirinos, who represents producers, and they're engaged in the leadership of the business. And I think that means they then talk to all of the producers that we deal with, which are not many because we don't, spread ourselves thinly. If we bring new ones on board, which is quite a big deal, you're looking for organizations, so cooperatives that I guess are having the same values as you, often ones that engage young people and women. We took on a new cooperative in Colombia, or probably about 9 years ago or something now, and we carefully worked with a cooperative that was looking for a direct relationship and wanted to make some real significant changes. Because what we do is we have representation at a leadership level. Those two directors represent all the cooperatives we work with, and the cooperatives also have a share in the business. So the shareholding in the business includes a percentage of shares that are owned by the coffee producers that we buy from. So I guess it's a very direct kind of collaboration on a long-term basis. So you're talking about relationships of 20, 30 years old. And we do our fair trade, we do our organic, but then we set up a charity. Another pioneering thing was we set up a charity in 2009 called Producers Direct, which is a charity that's owned by the farmers to maximize impact with farmers, both socially and environmentally. And they then, we donate money to Producers Direct, and then they raise money from other donors across the world. And then they work with farmers to make a significant difference, whether that's about coffee yields and quality, or whether it's about diversification of income. So, growing avocados or honey or fish farming, so that you're, as a coffee family, you're not totally dependent on a monocrop. You're building a sustainable business.
Yeah.
and making sure that you take on technology and you get it, young people involved. Um, there's a lot we could talk about, I must say.
No, it's really interesting because I've done a couple of episodes with I did Windmill Street Coffee slash Drury Tea and Coffee.
Mhm.
The managing director there, Marco, was saying something similar where he said, it's you coffee producers will grow multi-crop systems, not just from a shade tree point of view, for obviously growing their specialty coffee, Arabica mainly in that sense, more sustainably, but also, like you say, it's that diversification of income from a business perspective. And that again lends itself to sustainability because those businesses inherently can be more sustainable and they're not just relying on the one, monocrop, as you've mentioned. And I think what would be interesting maybe to get into a little bit more, kind of moving from the production side of things to kind of where you're CEO of a listed company, in itself brings its own challenges. So what are some of the challenges in terms of managing, first of all, from a business point of view, Cafe Direct, and what are some of the kind of major trends that you see across the industry, for the next few years? How do you see yourself navigating that choppy water going forward, really?
Wow.
Bit of a generic question, but is
Yeah.
there anything that sticks out? Is it just price of Arabica? Is it price of green? Is it, the supply chain?
Well, I think the supply chain is under great pressure. I mean, because you've not just got the impact of climate change on harvests, particularly somewhere like Brazil that, is, 44% of the marketplace. Um, you've also got shipping issues. There's a lot of issues at ports in a number of origins. Um, and then, probably the biggest impact is climate change within origin. Um, I think because we are part owned by producers and we have a direct relationship, that helps us to navigate that. Um, and because we are interested in paying high prices, although it's hard sometimes to work out how you balance that in terms of the marketplace. You know, it. I was unhappy when coffee was $1 a pound, and at 3.25, it does mean more money is flowing back, even though there's some inadequacies in the system. Um, I mean, certainly managing that supply chain risk and inflation is a challenge. I think to a point you made earlier about being distinctive and different, I think, our biggest opportunity is to help people realize that we are, a genuine game-changing business that's, every time you buy a bag of Café Direct coffee, you are improving farmers' lives more than you are doing other things. And so I think finding a way of getting that across in a way that doesn't need an hour interview or, a
Yeah.
4-page article in a paper is key. It's almost like we belong to the B Corps movement and we belong to the social enterprise movement, and it's almost like you want to be part of a campaigning change in the way business is seen, but you also need to make sure that you're renowned for that and that people know that not only is the coffee better, but the way coffee is done is better. And so that's, to your point earlier, that's something that means you can drink amazing coffee today and know you can do in 10, 20 years time. Um, so I think that marketing piece is a big challenge. And then, the supply chain of food and drink is going to be challenging for the world, and certainly in coffee, it's definitely challenging. So
Yeah, and I think it, the bigger companies that stand the test of time are probably better equipped to deal with that from their experience rather than these that are kind of starting up. And it's not to try and discourage anyone that wants to start a coffee company and say, don't bother, but it's to say, it's not necessarily as easy as buying white label bags of beans and sticking a pretty looking logo on it and going, okay, I've got a nice Instagram account, I can make good latte art, and off you go. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And
yeah.
I think to your point, it's only over time that you see, the real sustainable, to use that word again, businesses that last for good reason. It's not just because of marketing, it's because you're actually doing the work. And like you say, I think that the word that was coming to mind when you're talking about your kind of board of directors is that there's a vested interest across the board throughout the supply
Mm,
chain. And there's actually like you know, there's a reason you're not just working for the shareholder, you're because like I say, there's vested interest across the board, across the supply chain. So it makes a lot of sense as to why, you know, it's in everyone's interest from the farmers, the producers, all of the green buyers, all the way up to the top level where you are. It's everyone's working towards the same common goal, which I think is clearly something that
yeah.
you don't see as often as you probably should in a lot
Mm.
of industries, but obviously within coffee as well.
Yeah, no, it's how you leverage that in the marketplace to be distinct and different and get people to make a positive choice, isn't it? And you're up against some very large competitors who are very well capitalized and can invest in brands at a level that a lot of smaller businesses can't. I think your point about starting up in business, I think you've got to, people should pursue their dreams, but you're right, it's not straightforward, is it? I mean, innovation and starting up are things that have got high levels of risk and failure, but both in coffee and in beer, there's a real love of it, isn't there? So there's a lot of people who start, micro roasting or micro brewing and, can do very well from it, but it's not without its risks, no, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point comparing it to beer as well. And some people compare it to chocolate, and it's
Hmm.
kind of one of those things that if it starts as a passion project and you're happy to put the long hours in, then maybe maybe you should only really do it if that's the case, because it's going to be a long old slog otherwise, really, if you're just doing it for the money sort of thing. There's other ways to make a profit.
Yeah, no, I'm sure this is true. So yeah, but then hey, in life, you should do what you love. It's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. Maybe moving a little bit more towards sort of consumers, because I think we've touched a lot about the production of coffee, the supply chain from an industrial point of view. But with Espresso Insiders, what I'm trying to kind of help do is educate the consumer to say, this is not just all about picking the shiniest looking bag on the coffee aisle in your local supermarket, or the one with the best marketing on Instagram or what have you. It's about actually, what are you buying? Why are you buying it? Do you actually know what you want? Some people's, I think I hear a lot from friends that into the coffee. I love nice coffee, and it's okay. Well, what does that actually mean? Do you what sort of flavor notes do you like? Do you like light, medium, dark roast? What about acidity? All these different things. And I'm not saying every consumer needs to go into that level of depth, but I think a little bit of education about what they're buying can go a long way.
Yeah, yeah,
And so if there was something that you could say to an end consumer who is going down the shopping aisle at Waitrose or Tesco, whoever, and they're looking at, some of you obviously you've partnered with, Waitrose to do kind of single origin and specialty, kind of higher premium level coffee, and also you've got kind of, entry level beans and what have you as well. If you were going to say something to that consumer and say, what would you want to tell them that they wouldn't know, if they're just trying to pick something off the shelf? What's a kind of little known, snip bit of information they might benefit from? Think about what you're buying more. What would it be?
my goodness. I mean, certainly Café Direct's Machu Picchu is a quite remarkable coffee. It's a very chocolatey coffee, works very well. It's good enough to cut through milk, but it's also got enough body and enough complexity for it to be standalone as a black coffee, as I think coffee should be, of course. So I think that works very well. I mean, I suppose to me that's a very high grade specialty coffee that's available quite broadly and is quite well, reasonably priced. Because a lot of specialty in the last 20 years has been very much quite highly priced as well. I think Machu Picchu is probably one of the best value coffees you can get because it is, it's an SCA grade, high grade specialty coffee. It's also quite lightly roasted. It's not as lightly roasted as some of the coffees you'll be thinking about from a very small roaster, but it's certainly not. It's high quality coffee that's then been carefully roasted slowly.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not the Starbucks kind of torched, burnt flavor that you're going to get from an extremely dark roast. Like blasphemy.
well, there are. It's a funny old game, isn't it? Because you've got some brands that are phenomenally available and who are omnipresent, but clearly, people like you and I have, because of the where we are, have become much more discerning about coffee.
Mm.
The other thing, I don't know if you picked it up, but we acquired a company in 2023.
Service company, was it?
It
Or
was, yeah, a company called Bewley's UK, and as part of that, we acquired a brand called Grumpy Mule,
okay,
which
nice.
is a specialty brand, um, and has a very good single origin from Colombia, a very good single origin from Sumatra and from Peru, and also has a number of different blends that are very good. Because the single origin products are great, but you can blend really good coffee if you get the right base and then you bring out some of the notes from other origins. Um, and Grumpy Mule's interesting to your point a minute ago about how do you help people access it. We're making Grumpy Mule very much about a straight talking, easy to access route into specialty coffee. So a lot of the specialty coffees that you'll have got into because of the nature of your passion for it and your work are quite inaccessible. They're kind of they're trying to say that they're special and they're hard to understand, and you
That's
need to
moral
read it.
appeal almost. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
we must be high quality because we're difficult to understand,
Yeah. Yeah.
and hard to.
So So if you look at Grumpy Mule, we're very much trying to say that it's accessible specialty. So it's trying to help consumers understand what good coffee is without all the nonsense and without feeling like it's hard to get into. So and we're quite excited about that because again, it's very high quality coffee and it's roasted very properly and lightly and slowly rather than, as you suggested, some coffees might be. Um, yeah, the worst thing is, people who are buying lower grade quality coffee and then roasting it very, very heavily, isn't it, really?
Yeah, 'cause you're masking the underlying flavor. Whereas, like you say, when you're roasting something light, and I think to your point, there's a sliding scale. And actually, I think to someone that is in coffee already, they try to maybe go for something that's lighter roasted because maybe they're using a Chemex or maybe they're using a V60 or something like that, where the you know they're light. They want that lighter roast to bring out the more floral or fruity notes. They like a bit of acidity. And they know what they're after for a start. I think if you're the average man on the street and you want to upgrade from your kind of shop bought coffee that you might not buy Cafe Direct already and you might not appreciate the difference as much, but I think if you can make high quality specialty coffee accessible and where it's kind of maybe a medium roast, which again is a bit of a what is medium, but lighter than your typical Italian roast or French like dark, you're still bringing out that underlying flavor, but you're making it accessible at the same time. So I think that's exciting, and I'll definitely have to give it a try. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, no, well, certainly Machu Picchu is well worth trying. But then, yeah, Grumpy Mule for a person of your nature, Luke,
Good to
would be
try.
very, very keen to hear what you think.
Absolutely, yeah, we can definitely give my opinion. And I think kind of just on that as well, if someone was, you know, looking to specifically look at Cafe Direct's range,
Yeah.
and maybe they're interested in coffee, they want to improve what they're looking to, they want to upgrade and step up their morning cup of coffee, where would you suggest they start? We've mentioned Machu Picchu, but maybe as a journey, if someone was going to try that and then
Hmm.
move on to something else, where would you maybe see their journey would go?
Well, from Mexico, we have Mayan Gold, which is a bit more caramelly, still relatively accessible, but again, it's an organic, fair trade, specialty coffee. I think you'll just find there's a bit more moving on from chocolate to more notes of caramel and um, perhaps a little bit stronger as well. But so that's quite good. I mean, we the Colombian one is good. It's not as widely available. I mean, Mayan Gold and Machu Picchu are the two that are most available. Um, and very much then, I think once you get into it, moving up into Grumpy Mule to access kind of higher end again is a good thing. So getting into Grumpy Mule to access the higher end, I guess. So you sort of got Machu Picchu, Mayan Gold, accessing specialty coffee at a very accessible level, and then moving into um, Grumpy Mule. The other thing, of course, is we do have an online business where you can have direct to consumer and you can get the variety that you would want to get from a online provider. And we each month we have a different one. Often we get those from the same cooperatives and so on and so forth. But yeah.
Yeah, because you see a lot of subscription services popping up now, and you know, more of them. It's almost the other way around. Some smaller coffee producers will offer a subscription service, and then you might see them in a supermarket, or more widely available. But kind of you're the other way, where you've been had a store presence for a long period of time, and then you're kind of now offering a smaller brand with Grumpy Mule as accessible specialty, and then subscription as well. And like you say, with kind of more variety on a monthly basis, which is good. But I think that you've obviously built that foundation, and now are kind of
Yeah.
a bit more agile, moving into that whole subscription space as well, which is fantastic.
And to me, the important thing is, they're all going to be amazing coffees coming directly from producers that are in a long-term relationship with us. And then ultimately, you're working with a business model that is making a difference rather than just lining a few people's pockets. So
Absolutely. And that's the running theme throughout the business, obviously, John. And from what we've discussed, that's the key, isn't it? You're putting the producer and the goodwill first, and money comes second, as opposed to the other way around, which I think is, if you're in a business, you need to be profitable and to be sustainable in yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. I think this is what is good to get. The end consumer to know and appreciate is that you really do put the producers, the farmers, the small man first, if you like.
yeah.
And that's really, obviously at the heart of the business. So I think no, it's fantastic.
The Building Better Business podcast.
Yeah, that's was that whole experience for you.
Yeah. And we started the podcast ourselves, and the idea was Café Direct was 30 years old in 2021. And so for the celebration of 30 years, we talked to people who'd founded the organization or had been on the journey. So people like Oxfam. So some of the guests in season one were, Oxfam, other founders, producers, the co-op as the first retail customer, and so on and so forth. So it was the first series in the first year was very much a celebration of 30 years. And then the second season, the team in the business got hold of it and made it much more, I guess, strategic, and it started to be more about the way you build better business quite seriously. So very much, if you looked at season two, you end up with two guests, and you're looking at different perspectives about, I don't know, whether it's about carbon or whether it's about governance or whether it's about the difference between making dividends for a company or giving money to producers and so on and so forth. So the idea of the second series was the Building Better Business podcast is about challenging you to think about business done differently. And it's also linked to, we have a framework, which is effectively our manifesto, which looks after the four pillars that we adhere to, which is, growers, environment, our community, and our role in business. And so a lot of it flowed from that kind of more strategic framework. So yeah, but it was, I mean, I think it's quite interesting because there are a lot of podcasts out there, but our one certainly is coming from what we believe in, isn't it? Very much so. Yeah.
And your experience, obviously, it's something
Mm.
that, you're talking about. I think this the first series, the fact that it was a 30-year anniversary idea and you're talking to the internal founders, etc., and it's a celebration of that, you're talking from, your experience within the business. But then obviously the second series being more, it's applicable to a lot of different industries. It's not just coffee, the fact
Oh
that
yeah. Yeah.
you're branching out into different subjects in terms of, yeah, like corporate governance, etc. It's something that I think, yeah, you're talking about, what you believe in. I wouldn't be able to talk about that, but I could talk about maybe someone tell the end consumer how, they might be able to do a bit of better milk steaming or whatever. But, that's what the aim of this is as well, is to give people a peek behind the curtain,
Yeah.
in consumer. I think a little bit of coffee education can go a very long way, and it can really impact your, consumer preferences, choices, consumer behavior. And I think
Yeah. You're provoking, aren't you? Really, you're helping to inform and provoke, and hopefully get a change.
that's the idea.
And certainly that season two that you referred to, as you say, some of the guests were from large food companies. I think we had the founder of Riverford Organic on there. Um, we had a number of people that then were provoking how you think about business. So no, I mean, it's a really good communication tool, isn't it? It's to get people to think about things through this medium. So
I'd encourage anyone listening to this to go and listen to that after they finish this episode, of course. And
okay,
we'll
I
put
know.
some links below in the show notes. Final question is, how do you take your morning coffee, John? How do you like to drink your coffee in the morning?
Um, well, I'm a big V60 fan.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think it gives a really clean cup of coffee, and I like the methodology and you know um, from pouring the water and the way it works. I think it's a great method. So I'm definitely a big V60 user for my first cup. I did get into a stovetop for a while because a close friend of mine bought me a stovetop, and I managed to get to grips with that. Um, I think probably my preference would be a V60 out of the two.
I've been
Um,
using my V60 a lot recently as well because I've been doing a bit of content with it, and I've tried different. AeroPress is very good when you're on the move.
yeah,
I think, like you say, the mocha pot is great, but it's a little bit more. I don't know. I think sometimes it's hard to get right.
yep,
The
yep,
grind size, a lot of people say you want to use a really fine grind, but actually I think sometimes you've got a very small margin for error with that. And
yep,
actually you increase the grind size slightly, it can make it a little bit more, the window that you have to get it right is wider. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, right. The V60 makes it very consistent, doesn't it? It's sort of more idiot-proof than a stovetop marker
yeah.
type thing. I mean, the other thing I do use is
Oh yeah, French press.
cafetiere, but it's really because my where I work at home is away from the house, and I
Okay.
need enough to keep me going for a period of time. So
Yeah, there's again a much using a coarser grind. It's a lot easier to get right, and I think especially also having with with the coarser grinds, you can leave it for a little bit longer, and it's not gonna over extract as quickly, I think, as well.
yeah, that's the concern then, isn't it? If you've got a 4 cup cafetiere and it's for you, you've got to
Well,
you're going to end up with the last couple of cups are over extracted, as it were. So
yeah,
yeah,
but
but no, certainly I would be more of a V60 person. I mean, I certainly um, before the pandemic, I was very much I wanted V60 to be the method of choice, and I put a lot of effort with Harrio into getting V60s out and about. And because you can buy a V60 for £7 or £8,
yeah.
and you can pick up the papers made out of the right paper, and that's much better than using a pod machine or anything else. Yeah,
People get espresso machines for Christmas or what have you, and have no idea how to use them. Which, at the end of the day, you can have a lot of money spent on an espresso machine and make worse tasting coffee than something that is, like you say, incredibly inexpensive and a lot easier to actually use and dial in. You've got a lot wider margin for error when it comes to grind size and the methodology. And okay, you can start kind of improving your technique with your pour and what have you, but you can get pretty decent tasting coffee just using a normal kettle.
yeah. And you get much more engaged with the product, I think, than you would do with a machine. Yeah.
Absolutely. So no, I'm on the same page as you. I love a V60 myself as well, and I think it's good to try different things and have a bit of variety, and that's part of the
Yeah.
fun. But like I say, I think a lot of, particularly on social media, you see a lot of espresso dominant content, and I've called this podcast and blog and what have you espresso insiders because I feel like it's a topic in itself. But actually,
Mhm.
I think one of the things I probably recommend to the average, user is don't get an espresso machine straight away because it's very hard to dial it in.
Mhm.
And maybe start with a V60 and then build yourself up to something if you really want to. Because it's a faff at the end of the day. In the morning, a lot of people don't have the time to do it.
And the UK is still dominated by instant coffee, and I think to me, the reason I was really interested in V60s is it's quite a low cost way of getting more households moved into real coffee, if I can be so blunt, rather than the freeze dried product. And so certainly, yeah, no, I think if your time's short in the morning, making a V60 is so quick.
I completely agree. And it's something that I'm actually working on at the moment, is putting together a little bit of a guide questionnaire type thing, is to kind of help people find the right brewing method, bean, et cetera, for them based on their budget, financial budget, but also
Mhm.
I think time
Yeah.
cost is really important. Something that's underrated because even with even with a cafetiere, if you're going from instant and you're going to upgrade to something else, an AeroPress is quick, but a lot of people, it's maybe slightly more expensive than a V60. It's still not expensive, but it requires a little bit more technique, a little bit more interest in coffee. Whereas I think going straight from or going from instant to a cafetiere, maybe people don't have the time to let it steep, grind their own beans quickly, and
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. If you're rushing out, something like a V60 is easy to, pour over
Oh,
a couple of
yeah,
minutes,
yeah.
you're good to go.
Yeah, no, I think we're very both in agreement that V60 is an excellent and a good, sustainable way of doing it. You can manage the amount of water quite well. No, I mean I did go to the AeroPress World Championships many years ago in
Right.
Colombia, where a lot of people were mic'd up showing you how to do an AeroPress. And I'm with you that technically I feel it's a bit more challenging.
Yeah, I think that's maybe for sort of slightly further down the rabbit hole, so to
Yeah.
speak. But I think, yeah, one of the kind of missions of what I'm trying to do with this is, like you say, in the UK in particular, a kind of at home, people are quite instant coffee dominant, and in
Yeah.
cafes, I'm finding it increasingly rare that you'll see a nice filter or a batch brew. You see a lot of espresso-based drinks, obviously, which fair enough, I
Yeah.
understand. But um, yeah, I think appreciating filter coffee at an entry level, people doing it at home in the morning, and also, you know, specialty coffee houses offering filter, I think is probably no bad thing as well to kind of get people to understand the appreciate what they're drinking through a clean cup, which you don't necessarily always get with espresso even sometimes, it's very easy to mess it up.
No, well, there you go. Well, does that do you?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate that.
Great. No, well, thank you for reaching out and lovely to spend time with you. And